Hi, welcome to the third edition to Indivisible Fort Bend County's podcast. And I'm really excited today to have Dana Vandewalker with us. And Dana is running for District Number 8 for the position of the Texas State Board of Education. And that is a really important position that a lot of people don't even understand and aren't aware of. And I'll let Dana explain that as we move into the podcast. But first, I want Dana to introduce herself. So Dana, talk a little bit about yourself and why you see this as an important position and what made you want to run, and go for it. Give us a little background.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. So my name is Dana Vandewalker. I am running for State Board of Education, District 8. Just sort of the 30-second overview of who I am. I have just over 20 years of experience in education at all levels. So I actually started my teaching career as an elementary ESL teacher, and I now work in a community college district as an administrator. So I have sort of the experience of all levels, and I also have experience inside the classroom and outside of the classroom, so in teaching and in administration. I have a particular interest in curriculum, which is sort of how I got interested in the State Board of Education. But I'm also really interested because not long after moving to Texas, just for perspective, I've been here since 2015. I noticed that there just weren't very many Democrats on the ballot in my area. I live in what is often perceived to be a very red or solid red district. And I just felt, I don't think it's as red as people think it is. And I think that there's some real change to be made here. And so I did a little bit of investigating, and I discovered that my Republican opponent, the incumbent, who's now the member for District 8, has been in the position for 12 years, and she's been unopposed all 12 of those years.
Wow.
And so I thought, I can't let that stand.
Right.
I need to throw my hat to the ring and put my experience in education to good use.
Indeed. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about this office, this position. It is so extremely important, and some of the things kind of caught my attention. But first of all, let's look at some of the roles that the State Board of Education, what they do. They really set the policies and standards for public schools. Those include setting curriculum standards, reviewing and adopting instructional materials, and we know that Texas is the textbook capital of the country, that most other states follow what we choose, right, or the options. Establishing education requirements and overseeing the Texas Permanent School Fund, which I was so shocked is in the billions of dollars. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. That really caught my attention. And appointing board members to military reservation and special school districts, providing final review of rules proposed by the State Board of Educator certification, and then reviewing the commissioner's proposed award of new charter schools with the authority to veto and recommend the applicants. So let's go ahead and talk about maybe I think the first one in the primary responsibility of setting curriculum standards, right? So can you talk, first of all, about the relationship with, TEA and the Texas Board of Education, how that fits under the umbrella?
Yeah, sure. So, when we look at sort of the big picture of the State Board of Education, the thing that I like to zero in on is curriculum. And so curriculum is about, if I had to estimate, maybe 60 or 70% of the responsibility of the State Board of Education. It's a huge task. And so if you have kids in the local school system, you have surely heard the term TEKS before, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And so the TEA sort of helps form those TEKS. And then the State Board of Education figures out how we are going to enact them. And so what does that look like in practice? How are we accomplishing the TEKS history standards in our, ninth grade history course?
Right.
So what's included, what's excluded, how we're assessing students, how we're covering certain topics. And this actually goes all the way up and starts to impact higher ed as well, because, we're talking about what's included in the classroom, but we're also talking about the things that your students need to learn to progress to the next grade, and then in high school to be able to graduate from high school, right? So who decided that that all high school students in Texas need 2 years of language, or need a year of PE, need 4 years of math? These are all things that are discussed and covered by the State Board of Education, but they also go much more in depth into how things are taught, how they're assessed, and by what standards. So the big picture of the State Board of Education is curriculum. And a lot of people sort of confuse the State Board of Education and the school board. And you hear a lot more about the school boards, right? So the school board, might be Fort Bend ISD or Katy ISD or Conroe ISD. And they're, working a lot more with the day-to-day operations of the schools in their district. Whereas the State Board of Education sort of has their hand in all of the curriculum across the state. And that's sort of their main focus.
Gotcha. So let's go into that. Let's talk about the TEKS. Is there an issue with the way that this curriculum is set up now, in the maybe perhaps the overall organizational sense or the content sense? What is the biggest issue you see with that? And also, you can sort of feed into the STAR test and the proposed changes that the board is looking into doing. What are your thoughts? What are the biggest challenges related to this if you were to get elected? What bothers you the most, or what needs to be addressed the most in your mind?
Oh, that's a loaded question. A lot of things bother me, and a lot of things need to be addressed.
Right.
But let me take 2 steps back. So the first thing is, the State Board of Education is a partisan race. So there are Republicans and Democrats, but it is one of those races that really shouldn't be, because you need a certain level of expertise in education. And we are all trying to do what's best for Texas students, and that's not really a partisan issue. But where we see things start to get a little bit convoluted is when we have certain PACs or certain policy groups that are trying to influence what's included in the curriculum or what's excluded in the curriculum.
Their agenda.
So
Agenda-based. They're
exactly.
driven by an agenda, right?
Yeah. So, we know that the Bluebonnet curriculum that Texas currently uses has been funded by several different conservative donors and has conservative influence, and more specifically Christian nationalist influence. And so if we look at how that's impacting the TEKS, what's under review right now is the social studies TEKS, and actually the social studies TEKS are sort of the perfect example of this, because we can see that they're cutting certain things and adding additional things into the curriculum, not for any specific student success measure, but because they're under pressure from these outside influences. I'll give a really specific example. We're starting to change the language that we use around slavery, right? We're getting into sort of a linguistic argument about how we should refer to this period of time and how it impacted enslaved humans in our country. And so one of the things that's, been sort of a point of focus for the most recent revisions of the social studies TEKS is that they've removed coverage on Nat Turner's slave rebellion. And so they are cutting actually not just that specific slave rebellion, but the concept that there were slave rebellions. And so this is something that's really interesting to me, because this seems like fundamental foundational knowledge that students need to know, that there were slave rebellions and some of the reasons why slaves were rebelling and how they did it, how they organized. And so, again, when this gets political, it gets really to where a lot of lines are blurred. And
Correct. There seems to be, unfortunately, this notion that we don't want our white kids to feel uncomfortable about the past, right? And my background is history and economics. My advanced degrees are in history and economics. I find that really fascinating. That my approach whenever I've taught these classes before, I tell my students that I'm a white guy, obviously, and I don't walk around with my tail between my legs and feeling like I need to apologize for anything because I didn't do it. But at the same time, you don't lie to your kids, right? Teach them the truth. I think the problem more is with parenting and instilling confidence in your kids to go out and face the world, right? To me, it's a parenting issue rather than this whole Christian white nationalism where your parents would say that their kids are feeling guilty and they don't want their kids to feel bad about hearing about these things, right? It's just absurd. I think it's a whole parenting issue. You can be a confident guy, white guy, and you can still know the truth and teach the truth. There's no reason to hide it, right? There's no difference. You can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? So
I completely agree, and I do think that it's a parenting issue. But to that end, I also think it's that much more important that we're not trying to rewrite history.
Sure.
And that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to rewrite history for our high school students and others. Yeah, I feel the exact same way as you. To be aware of my privilege and take action on that and
Yeah.
help lift others up.
And I
And I think, this is an interesting modern example. Like, I think we can learn a lot too from Germany. Germany had a very, very intense reckoning period post Holocaust, post World War II. And I think they're all the better for it and
Sure.
how they teach about that time period.
Absolutely. And they still are an industrial power with technology, still
Yeah.
making Mercedes. Their tail's not tucked between their legs, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You really hit on some really important issues. And I think what you're bringing into the picture is this culture war phenomenon. I've checked the numbers on a number of these Republican candidates, and some of them have over half of their money comes from Tim Dunn's PACs, right?
Yeah.
So who are they beholden to, right? Okay. So let me just take a little diversion to this, and then we'll go back into some other issues here. But what power does the State Board of Education have over school boards banning textbooks? Is it any influence on that at all?
So this is interesting. It's not that the State Board of Education has a direct role over school boards and their role in banning books, but there is sort of a symbiotic relationship. And what I mean by that is, earlier in the year, before the State Board of Education, they were discussing the updated list of mandated reading for certain grade levels. And so, we talk about book bans, but we also talk about different readings that are mandated to be included. And so some of the new readings that were mandated to be include passages from the Bible.
Yeah.
And so, there's an interaction about what here with the school board and the state board about what our students can and cannot read or have to read. And so, we don't have direct oversight in terms of book bans, but I actually just recently testified at the Deer Park ISD school board meeting in opposition to their proposed book ban because it is obviously very much related to what we're talking about.
Right.
And I think that the state board needs to be a little bit more vocal in standing up against book bans and school districts that are proposing them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Kids can turn out with conservative or traditional values without all of that book banning and all of this far right extremism in my mind.
It's so interesting. I won't get into the full details of the Deer Park ISD book ban, but I'll say that one of the books that they were proposing to ban was a book that was fundamentally about intimate partner violence and in a dating relationship. So a boyfriend and girlfriend that, the relationship turned violent. And because that book has a sex scene in it, they wanted to ban it. And I said, you know what? I think that our teenagers need to learn about intimate partner violence. They need to know about these.
Absolutely. And okay, what about teacher retention? I mean, isn't it true right now that, I don't know, 40% of all teachers are uncertified in Texas? Is that?
Yeah, I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but it is. Yeah, it is a pretty statistically high number, and it is also higher than the national average. And so, there's a couple of different factors that play into this.
Right. Okay.
So, and I like to go back to the idea of why do we have alternative teacher certification in the first place? The idea where alternative teacher certification came from was because we had certain disciplines, especially workforce disciplines. So folks in high school who are teaching wood shop or welding or, electrical circuits, stuff like that. They were coming into this secondary education setting and they didn't have a background in education. They had a background in woodworking or welding or whatever the case was. But in order for them to be compliant with the law, they needed to have that certification. So we created these alternative teacher certification programs. So they were the original sort of recipients of these types of programs or participants in these types of programs. So that sort of transitioned into, well, okay, now we're going to open up these programs to individuals that are changing careers or who are, going to the next phase of their life and they want to transition out of whatever industry they're in and into the classroom. Okay, there's some usefulness to that, right? We do need to be able to accommodate people doing that. To now we're using alternative teacher certification to get folks in the door and say, don't worry about your certification. We'll hire you and you can work on it while you're with us, right? Well, then what happens for the year or two that teacher is in the classroom and they have essentially no teacher training at all, no pedagogical skills at all. Right. And so, could they, end up being certified and being a great teacher? Sure, maybe. Yeah. But what's happening in the interim while they're teaching our students? Right. It's really complicated, right? And so, fundamentally, this comes down to teacher recruitment, but it also comes down to teacher retention. So why do people want to become teachers in the state of Texas? We haven't had a cost of living adjustment in more than 15 years. We have some of the lowest teacher salaries in the country. There are districts in the state of Texas that are starting teachers in the low 30,000s. And this is a position that requires a bachelor's degree.
Now, let me back up. When you say cost of living adjustment, are you talking about TRS benefits retirement?
No, I'm talking about inflation.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't had any sort of adjustment for inflation. Okay. Some individual school districts have taken it upon themselves to do that, but it has not been state mandated. So, of course, if it's not state mandated, then you're going to have plenty of school districts that won't do it.
Yeah.
And so I sort of support the motion that's been put forward recently that there needs to be a minimum 7% increase to adjust for inflation and cost of living for all teachers and paraprofessionals, a minimum.
Right. Yeah, I was surprised when I looked at TRS and compared it to other states too. It's not one of the best as far as the pension retirement. I know I was talking to a teacher from New York City, and I was just blown away at the numbers that they get and others. So, let's talk a little bit about something else that is that's actually a really burning issue is the voucher system. But now the vouchers you wouldn't have any control over. That's a state legislature issue, right?
So again, this is where the State Board of Education fills kind of an interesting niche spot in the system.
Okay.
So the voucher system is voted into existence by the state legislature, but then it gets handed off to the State Board of Education, who gets to execute it. Right. So they are in control when it comes to how it's going to work.
Okay.
So students can apply, what types of schools are eligible, who gets
That's right.
approved, doesn't get approved.
Okay.
And so I'll tell you, I'm fundamentally opposed to school vouchers.
Of course. Yeah.
But I also am not running for a position in the state legislature, so I can't really do something
Right.
about that specifically.
Right.
But what I do think, and what I, you know, do hope that I will influence is how the vouchers are distributed. So there's actually a case, a lawsuit in Texas right now about certain Islamic schools not being approved
Right.
to act school voucher system for no apparent reason other than the fact
Exactly.
that they're Islamic schools.
Because they're bringing Sharia law, right?
Yeah, exactly. They're
Yeah.
not.
Of course.
They
Yeah.
function just like the Christian schools in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that we need to have a really serious conversation about how this new law is being enacted and how it's benefiting students. And my argument would be that it's not, or it's benefiting students unfairly. We also
Right.
know that about 70% of the students that applied for the voucher are already in private schools.
Yes, they tend to be upper middle class, upper sort of income folks.
Yeah.
Average around $10,000 that a family can get back, and those are the same families that are already paying 30, 25, 30. And people that can't pay that, they're not going to make that gap up, right? So it's really, considering all the, the culture wars and the divisions, living in a microcosm of those same divisions, even at the level of politics that you're engaging in here. How do you propose to message to, let's say, purple people that are sitting on the fence that might have been mostly Republican or that are conservatives? How would you message to them to get them on your side? Besides,
One of the things that I really like to pull up as just a key talking point is college, career, and military readiness for high school students that are graduating. And it does not matter at all what side of the aisle you're on. Everyone can agree that we want our high school graduates to be college, career, and military ready. And the interesting thing for me, I have kind of a unique vantage point. So I work at a community college district. So I work with a huge group of students, and I see the product of our K-12 system. Right? So, I see the students that are coming into academic college classes. I see the students that are coming into the workforce and the vocational programs. And I see all of the different ways that they're underprepared. And so to me, that's kind of the argument that crosses the aisle of, I don't want to just make sure that your kid has a good education. I want to make sure that they can be gainfully employed and a contributing member of society. And so, we can talk about book bans, we can talk about STAR testing, we can talk about all these different things until we're blue in the face. But at the end of the day, that's what everyone wants, right? And I'll tell you, this is kind of an interesting topic for me because I actually don't have children. And a lot of people say, oh, that's surprising. You're running for state board, you don't have children in the education system yourself. And what I always say is, that's true. However, the students that are in our high schools right now are going to graduate. Some of them are going to go on to study nursing at Sam Houston State University. And 8 years from now, they might be my nurse when I go in for surgery.
right.
Right? I want them to know what they're doing.
Sure. Yeah.
And of course, I can come up with a billion other examples of that. But it's a community good to have students that are well educated and prepared for the workforce. And so I think that's a message that crosses the aisle.
Yeah.